Welcome back to Sleepless Teacher, where your mind goes to wander in the dark. You think you see the world clearly. You believe your thoughts are your own. You assume your choices are rational. But what if I told you that everything you think you know is filtered through 50 invisible lenses, 50 quiet whispers in your ear, shaping every decision, every belief, every memory? Tonight, we're diving deep into the hidden architecture of your mind, the cognitive biases that don't just influence your thinking, they are your thinking. From confirmation bias that shows you only what you want to see, to the spotlight effect that makes you think everyone's watching, when they're really not. These aren't flaws in your brain, they're features, evolutionary shortcuts that kept your ancestors alive, but might be keeping you slightly deluded. Before we begin this journey into the beautiful contradictions of human consciousness, hit that like button if you're ready to question everything you think you know. Subscribe for more late-night explorations of the mind. And drop a comment. Tell me where in the world you're listening from, and which bias you think controls you most. Because by the end of this series, you'll realize the most important bias of all is thinking you don't have any. Let's begin. Your mind is not neutral. It takes sides. It has preferences. It whispers in your ear, telling you what to notice. This is confirmation bias, the tendency to seek information that confirms what you already believe, to ignore what contradicts it. Like a detective who only looks for evidence that supports their theory, who turns away from clues that don't fit. You read the news, but do you read all the news? Or just the stories that make you nod? You have conversations, but do you listen to all voices? Or just the ones that echo your own? Your brain is trying to help. It wants to keep you comfortable, consistent. It doesn't want the chaos of contradiction. So it filters, it selects, it curates reality for you. Like a museum curator who only displays paintings they like, the truth becomes incomplete. But here's the strange part. Everyone does this. Everyone lives in their own filtered world, their own edited version of reality. So whose reality is real? Maybe they all are. Maybe reality is not one thing, but many things, 1,000 different stories, all true in their own way. Let that thought settle. Let it breathe. In the space between certainty and doubt, where all truths learn to coexist. Your mind keeps a highlight reel. The dramatic moments, the shocking news, the vivid experiences, these memories play on repeat. They feel more real, more likely, more important. This is the availability heuristic. When something is easy to remember, your brain assumes it's common. Plane crashes make headlines, car accidents don't, so you fear flying more than driving, even though cars are far more dangerous. Shark attacks capture imagination. Heart disease doesn't, so you worry about sharks, not about the quiet killer that claims millions. Your brain mistakes volume for truth, drama for frequency, the rare but memorable for the common but forgettable. It's not trying to deceive you. It's trying to protect you by making threats feel real, by keeping dangers vivid. But sometimes, the quiet risks are the real ones. Sometimes the boring truth is more important than the exciting lie. Maybe wisdom is learning to listen, to the whispers as well as the shouts, to the statistics as well as the stories. Let that thought drift. Let it find its own volume. In the space between memory and reality, where truth learns to speak softly. A curious thing happens when you learn a little. You feel like you know a lot. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect, the paradox of confidence and competence. When you know nothing, you know nothing. When you know everything, you know how little you know. But in between, in that dangerous middle ground, confidence peaks. Knowledge feels complete. The map feels like the territory. You've read an article, watched a video, had a conversation. Suddenly, you're an expert. The topic feels simple. The answers feel obvious. Why doesn't everyone see it? But expertise is like climbing a mountain. At the bottom, you can't see the peak. Halfway up, you think you're almost there. Only at the top do you see how high the mountain really is, how much more there is to climb. Real knowledge whispers. Real expertise asks questions. Real understanding knows its own limits. Maybe wisdom begins with intellectual humility, with saying, I don't know more often, with treating every conversation as a chance to learn something new. Let that thought climb. Let it find its own altitude, in the space between knowing and not knowing, where true learning begins. The first number you hear drops an anchor in your mind. Everything else gets pulled toward it. This is anchoring bias, the tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information. A car salesman says 50,000. You negotiate down to 40. You feel good, you got a deal. But maybe the car is only worth 30. The anchor was dropped too high, but you never questioned it. A restaurant lists a $100 steak. Everything else seems reasonable. The $40 salmon feels like a bargain. But without the anchor, would you pay 40 for fish? Your mind needs reference points, something to compare against, something to judge by. But the first reference becomes the ruler. It measures everything that follows, even when it's wrong, even when it's random, even when it's deliberately misleading. Negotiation, pricing, expectations, all dancing around, invisible anchors, numbers that fell from the sky and became the center of gravity. Maybe awareness is the first step to freedom, noticing the anchor, questioning the reference, asking, says who? Let that thought drift. Let it find its own depth, in the space between numbers and meaning, where value learns to float free. You've invested time, money, effort, energy. The project isn't working, the relationship is failing, the plan is crumbling, but you can't stop, you can't let go. You can't admit that what you've already spent is gone. This is the sunk cost fallacy, the belief that past investment justifies future commitment. You've put 5 years into this job. You hate it, but you can't quit. 5 years would be wasted. You've spent $1,000 on this car. It keeps breaking down, but you can't sell it. $1,000 would be lost. But here's the truth. The time is already gone. The money is already spent. The effort is already exhausted. Continuing doesn't bring it back. It just adds more loss to the pile. Your brain wants to justify the past, to make the pain meaningful, to turn mistakes into investments. But sometimes, the wisest choice is to walk away, to cut your losses, to admit that not every path leads somewhere worth going. Maybe courage is knowing when to quit, when to stop throwing good energy after bad, when to honor what you've learned by choosing differently. Let that thought settle. Let it find its own release, in the space between holding on and letting go, where wisdom learns to choose. The successful tell their stories. The failures stay quiet. This creates an illusion, a false pattern, a misleading map. This is survivorship bias, the tendency to focus on those who succeeded while ignoring those who didn't. You read about entrepreneurs who dropped out of college, who followed their passion, who took risks. They're millionaires now. The lesson seems clear. Drop out, follow passion, take risks. But what about the thousands who tried and failed? Whose stories never get told, whose dreams never get published? For every success story, there are countless invisible failures. For every winner, 1,000 quiet losers. The cemetery of broken dreams is always larger than the gallery of victories. But we don't visit cemeteries. We don't study failure. We don't learn from the paths that led nowhere. So we get a distorted picture, a reality that's brighter than it really is, a world where risks always pay off, where dreams always come true. Maybe wisdom is listening to the stories that don't get told, learning from the failures as much as the successes, understanding that for every visible triumph, there are invisible tragedies. Let that thought echo. Let it find its own voice in the space between victory and defeat, where all stories learn to matter. Looking back, everything seems inevitable, clear, obvious. You knew it would happen. You saw the signs. You could have predicted it. This is hindsight bias, the tendency to perceive past events as more predictable than they were. The stock market crashes. Of course it did. The bubble was obvious. The relationship ends. Of course it did. The red flags were everywhere. The team loses. Of course they did. Their weaknesses were glaring. But were they? Really? Or does memory edit the story? Does the ending rewrite the beginning? Your brain hates uncertainty. It wants patterns. It wants reasons. It wants the chaos of life to make sense. So it creates narratives, connects dots, builds bridges between cause and effect. Even when the bridges are built backward, even when the dots were never really connected. This makes you overconfident about your ability to predict, about your wisdom, about your judgment. Because if the past was obvious, surely the future will be too. But maybe the past wasn't obvious. Maybe it was just what happened. One possibility among many. Maybe humility begins with admitting you didn't see it coming, with honoring the mystery of how things unfold. Let that thought unfold. Let it find its own pattern in the space between memory and reality, where stories learn to tell themselves. Imagine two offers. First, I'll give you $50. Second, I'll give you $100. But there's a 50% chance you'll lose $50. Which do you choose? Most people choose the first, the guaranteed 50, even though the second offer has a higher expected value. This is loss aversion. The pain of losing feels stronger than the pleasure of gaining. Your brain weighs losses about twice as heavy as gains. Losing $20 hurts more than finding $20. Feels good. This shapes everything. Your relationships, your career, your investments, your dreams. You stay in the safe job, even though you're unhappy, because leaving feels like losing security. You keep the old phone, even though it's broken, because buying a new one feels like losing money. You avoid the difficult conversation, even though it might help, because conflict feels like losing peace. Loss aversion keeps you safe, but it also keeps you small. It prevents growth. It resists change. It turns life into a game of not losing, rather than a game of winning. Maybe courage is learning to risk loss for the chance of gain, to trade security for possibility, to choose growth over safety. Let that thought balance. Let it find its own weight in the space between holding on and letting go, where growth learns to begin. Everyone is doing it. Everyone is buying it. Everyone is talking about it. So you do too, without thinking, without questioning, without choosing. This is the bandwagon effect, the tendency to adopt beliefs because many others have adopted them. Fashion spreads this way. Trends, opinions, panics, crazes. One person starts, others follow. Soon everyone is following, but no one remembers who started or why. Social media amplifies this. Likes become validation. Shares become truth. Viral becomes important. The crowd becomes the arbiter of reality. But crowds can be wrong. History is full of popular delusions, mass hysteria, collective blindness, things that seemed obvious to everyone at the time, but look absurd in hindsight. Maybe independence is thinking for yourself, asking why, questioning the popular, choosing your own path, even when it's lonely, even when it's difficult, even when everyone else is going the other way. Sometimes the bandwagon is going off a cliff. Sometimes the crowd is running toward danger. Sometimes the wisest choice is to stand still and watch and think and choose for yourself. Let that thought stand. Let it find its own ground in the space between following and leading, where individual wisdom learns to emerge. You're special, different, luckier than most. Bad things happen to other people, not to you. This is optimism bias, the tendency to overestimate positive outcomes for yourself, while accurately estimating negative outcomes for others. You know the statistics. Most businesses fail. Most relationships end. Most dreams don't come true. But yours will be different. You'll be the exception, the one who makes it, the one who beats the odds. This bias keeps you going. It gives you hope. It makes you take risks, start businesses, fall in love, chase dreams. Without it, you might never try, never hope, never dare. But it also makes you unprepared, overconfident, blind to real dangers. You don't save enough money because you assume your income will keep growing. You don't wear a seatbelt because you assume accidents happen to others. You don't plan for failure because you assume you'll succeed. Maybe wisdom is balance, hope with preparation, optimism with realism, dreams with contingencies, believing in yourself while acknowledging the odds, planning for the best while preparing for the worst. Let that thought balance. Let it find its own probability in the space between hope and reality, where wisdom learns to plan. What happened yesterday feels more important than what happened last year. What you heard last echoes loudest in your mind. This is recency bias, the tendency to weigh recent events more heavily than older ones. The stock market drops today. You panic. You forget. It's been rising for months. The team loses this game. You doubt them. You forget. They've won 10 in a row. The news is bad today. The world feels dangerous. You forget. Yesterday's good news. Yesterday's safety. Yesterday's hope. Your memory has a spotlight. It illuminates the present, but it leaves the past in shadow. Recent events feel more real, more relevant, more predictive, but maybe they're not. Maybe yesterday's drop is just noise. Maybe today's loss is just variance. Maybe this moment's fear is just a moment. Your brain evolved for immediate threats, lions in the grass, storms on the horizon, dangers that needed immediate attention. But modern life is different. The real patterns play out over years, decades, lifetimes. Maybe wisdom is stepping back, zooming out, seeing the whole picture, not just the latest frame. Let that thought expand. Let it find its own timeline in the space between now and then, where perspective learns to form. She's beautiful, so she must be smart. He's successful, so he must be honest. They're famous, so they must be wise. This is the halo effect. When one positive trait creates a glow around everything else, the halo spreads. Beauty becomes intelligence. Success becomes virtue. Fame becomes wisdom. Even when there's no connection, even when there's no logic, even when there's no evidence. Companies do this too. Apple makes good phones, so their computers must be good. Google makes good search, so their social media must be good. The halo spreads beyond reason, beyond relevance, beyond truth. Your brain wants consistency. It wants people to be all good or all bad, simple, clear, predictable. It doesn't like complexity, contradiction, the messy reality that people are mixed, that talents don't transfer, that goodness in one area doesn't guarantee goodness in others. Maybe wisdom is seeing people clearly, not through the filter of first impressions, not through the glow of single achievements, but as they really are, complex, contradictory, beautifully, imperfectly human. Let that thought glow. Let it find its own light in the space between impression and reality, where people learn to be themselves. She's late to the meeting. She's disorganized, irresponsible, always has been. You're late to the meeting. Traffic was terrible. The babysitter was delayed. It's not your fault. This is the fundamental attribution error. When others fail, we blame their character. When we fail, we blame circumstances. He's poor. He's lazy. He made bad choices. You're struggling. The economy is tough. The system is rigged. It's not your fault. She's angry. She's difficult. She has issues. You're angry. You're stressed. You're having a bad day. It's understandable. We have full access to our own context, our struggles, our challenges, our circumstances, but we only see the surface of others, their actions, their outcomes, their failures, not their struggles, not their context, not their story. This creates a divided world where others are judged by their worst moments, and we are explained by our best intentions. Maybe empathy begins with flipping the script, assuming others have circumstances too, assuming our actions reveal our character too, giving others the benefit of the doubt we so easily give ourselves. Let that thought flip. Let it find its own perspective in the space between judgment and understanding, where compassion learns to grow. The surgery has a 90% success rate. The surgery has a 10% failure rate. Same surgery, same odds, different feeling. This is the framing effect. How information is presented changes how it's perceived. The ground beef is 90% lean. The ground beef is 10% fat. Same meat, same content, different appeal. Your brain doesn't just process information. It processes how that information is wrapped, the context, the emphasis, the emotional tone, half full or half empty. The glass is the same, but the feeling is different. The meaning is different. The choice is different. Politicians know this. Marketers know this. Advertisers know this. They don't lie. They don't need to. They just choose their frame, choose their angle, choose their light. The same truth can be made to feel hopeful or fearful, exciting or boring, important or trivial. Maybe wisdom is seeing through the frame to the truth underneath, asking not just what, but how, not just the facts, but the feeling, not just the message, but the messenger. Let that thought frame, let it find its own angle. In the space between information and interpretation, where meaning learns to shift. The project will take 3 months, you're sure of it. You've thought it through, you've made a plan, you've accounted for, well, most things. 6 months later, you're still working, still planning, still hoping to finish soon. This is the planning fallacy, the tendency to underestimate time, costs, and risks, while overestimating benefits and rewards. You know this happens, you've seen it before. Other people's projects always run late, always go over budget, always hit unexpected problems, but yours will be different. You're more careful, more thorough, more realistic, except you're not. You're just as human as everyone else, just as optimistic, just as blind to future complications. Your brain focuses on the plan, the ideal sequence, the perfect execution. It doesn't dwell on Murphy's Law, the fact that if something can go wrong, it probably will. Maybe wisdom is adding buffer time, expecting delays, planning for problems, assuming you're human, not superhuman, assuming your project is subject to the same forces that affect everyone else's. Let that thought extend. Let it find its own timeline, in the space between planning and reality, where patience learns to grow. You have a coffee mug, plain, simple, worth maybe $5. Someone offers you 7, you decline, 8, 9, 10, still no. But if you didn't own the mug, you wouldn't pay $10 for it. You might not pay 5. This is the endowment effect, the tendency to value things more once you own them. Your house, your car, your job, your ideas, your beliefs. Ownership creates attachment. Attachment creates value. Value creates resistance to change. You bought the stock at 50. It's worth 30 now. You won't sell, because selling means accepting the loss, admitting the mistake, letting go of what you once owned. But someone else, looking at the same stock, might see it clearly, might recognize it's only worth 30, might make the rational choice. Ownership clouds judgment. It makes you hold on too long, pay too much, resist too strongly. It turns rational decisions into emotional ones. Maybe wisdom is holding things lightly, owning without attachment, possessing without possession, remembering that everything is temporary. Everything is borrowed. Everything eventually lets go of you. Let that thought release. Let it find its own freedom in the space between having and being, where true value learns to rest. Things are fine, not great, not terrible, just fine. You could make changes, switch jobs, move cities, try something new, but change is hard, uncertain, risky. So you stay where you are, how you are, who you are. This is status quo bias, the tendency to prefer things as they are, even when change would be better. Your phone plan is expensive. There are cheaper options, better options, but switching requires research, paperwork, effort, so you stay and pay more. Your commute is long. There are shorter routes, faster routes, but learning new roads requires attention, mistakes, confusion, so you stay and waste time. Your habits are unhealthy. There are better habits, healthier habits, but changing requires willpower, discipline, discomfort, so you stay and suffer slowly. The status quo feels safe, familiar, predictable, even when it's not serving you, even when it's holding you back, even when it's quietly killing you. Maybe growth requires embracing discomfort, choosing uncertainty, risking failure, trading the familiar for the possible, the comfortable for the better. Let that thought shift. Let it find its own direction, in the space between staying and going, where courage learns to choose. A story appears, someone shares it, others repeat it, it spreads. Soon, everyone has heard it, everyone is talking about it, everyone believes it, not because it's true, but because it's everywhere. This is the availability cascade. When an idea becomes popular, simply because it's popular. The more you hear something, the more true it feels, the more normal it seems, the more real it becomes. Social media amplifies this. Algorithms reward engagement, repetition, virality. Truth becomes secondary. What matters is what spreads, what sticks, what gets shared. A rumor becomes a fact. A fear becomes a crisis. A trend becomes a movement. Not through evidence, not through logic, but through repetition, through echo, through the simple power of being heard. Your brain mistakes familiarity for truth, repetition for validation, popularity for accuracy. The more familiar, the more believable. The more repeated, the more real. Maybe wisdom is questioning the popular, checking the source, thinking for yourself, remembering that just because everyone says it doesn't make it true. Just because it's everywhere doesn't make it right. Let that thought cascade. Let it find its own truth. In the space between hearing and believing, where wisdom learns to filter. The coin has landed heads 5 times in a row. The 6th flip must be tails, right? The wheel has hit red 7 times in a row. The 8th spin must be black, right? Wrong. This is the gambler's fallacy. The belief that past results affect future probabilities. In random events, each flip is independent, each spin is separate, each outcome has no memory. The coin doesn't know it's been heads 5 times. The wheel doesn't care about the last 7 spins. But your brain sees patterns, expects balance, assumes. The universe keeps score. You've had bad luck, so good luck is coming. You've been rejected, so acceptance is due. You've failed, so success is near. But life isn't keeping score. Luck isn't a bank account. Fairness isn't a law of nature. Sometimes heads comes up 10 times in a row. Sometimes rejection follows rejection. Sometimes life is genuinely unfair. Maybe wisdom is accepting randomness, embracing uncertainty, playing each hand as it comes. Not because you're due, not because it's your turn, but because it's the only hand you have. Let that thought flip. Let it find its own odds. In the space between pattern and chaos, where probability learns to dance. The song is terrible. You change the station. It comes on again. You change it again. But somehow, you start humming it, then singing it. Then, you kind of like it. This is the mere exposure effect. The tendency to prefer things you've encountered before, even if you didn't like them initially. Familiarity breeds, not contempt, but comfort. The face you've seen looks more trustworthy. The name you've heard sounds more credible. The idea you've encountered feels more reasonable. Advertisers know this. Politicians know this. They don't need to convince you immediately. They just need to be seen, to be heard, to be present. Repetition creates recognition. Recognition creates comfort. Comfort creates preference. But this can be dangerous because familiarity isn't wisdom. Repetition isn't truth. Comfort isn't always good. The dictator's face becomes familiar. The lie becomes comfortable. The wrong path becomes the known path. Maybe wisdom is questioning comfort, challenging familiarity, asking, am I choosing this because it's good or just because it's familiar? Let that thought repeat. Let it find its own rhythm in the space between familiar and foreign, where choice learns to be conscious. Linda is 31, single, outspoken, studied philosophy, concerned about social issues, participated in protests. Which is more likely? Linda is a bank teller, or Linda is a bank teller, and active in the feminist movement. Most people choose the second option, the specific story, the detailed narrative, even though it's mathematically impossible. The second option is a subset of the first. It includes additional requirements. It must be less likely, but your brain doesn't think in probabilities. It thinks in stories, narratives, coherent explanations. The more details, the more believable. The more specific, the more real. The more complete, the more likely. This affects everything. Medical diagnosis, legal judgments, investment decisions. We prefer the complicated explanation, the detailed theory, the specific prediction, even when the simple answer is more likely to be true. Maybe wisdom is embracing simplicity, preferring the general to the specific, the probable to the possible, the boring truth to the interesting story. Let that thought conjoin. Let it find its own likelihood in the space between story and statistics, where truth learns to be simple. A test for a rare disease, 99% accurate. You test positive. The doctor looks grim. You have the disease, right? Maybe not. If the disease affects 1 in 1,000 people, and the test is wrong 1% of the time, then most positive tests are false alarms. But your mind ignores the base rate, the background probability. It focuses on the immediate result, the scary news, the dramatic moment. This happens everywhere. Terrorism feels more dangerous than car accidents because attacks are dramatic, memorable, frightening. But statistically, you're more likely to die driving to the store. Plane crashes make headlines. Heart disease doesn't. So you fear flying more than sitting, even though sitting kills more people. Your brain evolved for immediate threats, visible dangers, things that moved in the bushes. It doesn't think well about statistics, probabilities, base rates, background risks. Maybe wisdom is thinking in numbers, considering context, asking, how common is this? How likely is that? What are the real odds? Let that thought calculate. Let it find its own probability. In the space between fear and frequency, where perspective learns to count. Cancer cases cluster in your neighborhood. Something must be causing it. The water, the air, the power lines. It can't be coincidence, or can it? This is the clustering illusion, the tendency to see patterns in random events, to find meaning in meaningless clusters. Flip a coin 100 times. You'll get streaks, long runs of heads, extended sequences of tails. Your brain will wonder, why? What's causing it? But nothing is. It's just randomness, being random. Rain falls in scattered drops. Some areas get soaked, others stay dry. Your mind looks for reasons, explanations, patterns, but sometimes it's just weather. Being weather. Life imitates a random walk. Good things cluster, bad things cluster, not because of hidden forces, not because of secret causes, but because that's what randomness does. It clumps, it clusters, it creates patterns that look meaningful, but aren't. Maybe wisdom is accepting coincidence, embracing chaos, seeing clusters without seeking causes, finding peace in the absence of patterns. Let that thought scatter. Let it find its own randomness in the space between meaning and chance, where acceptance learns to cluster. You bet everything on a single stock. It skyrockets. You're a genius, a visionary, a master investor. But what if it had crashed? Would you still be a genius? This is outcome bias, judging decisions by their results, rather than by the process, the information available, the reasoning used. The drunk driver makes it home safely. Good outcome, bad decision. The surgeon takes a risky procedure. The patient dies. Bad outcome. But was it a bad decision? Maybe not. Maybe, given the information, it was the right choice. Results are influenced by luck, timing, factors beyond control, but your brain connects decisions to outcomes, success to wisdom, failure to foolishness. This makes you overconfident after wins, overly critical after losses, unable to learn from either because you're judging the wrong thing. Maybe wisdom is focusing on process, asking, was the reasoning sound? Was the information good? Was the method solid? Independent of how it turned out, because good decisions sometimes have bad outcomes, and bad decisions sometimes get lucky. Let that thought process, let it find its own method, in the space between choice and chance, where wisdom learns to judge. The plane might crash, the elevator might fall, the dog might bite, the stranger might attack. Your mind fixates on the possibility, not the probability. This is probability neglect. When fear overwhelms, mathematics. When emotion silences, statistics. Shark attacks are rare, lightning strikes are unlikely, terrorist attacks are uncommon. But when your brain imagines these scenarios, probability disappears. The 1% chance feels like certainty. The unlikely event feels inevitable. The distant possibility feels immediate. This shapes everything. Where you travel, how you live, what you fear, what you avoid. You drive instead of fly, even though driving is more dangerous. You avoid the city, even though suburbs have their own risks. You fear strangers, even though most violence comes from people you know. Maybe wisdom is thinking in percentages, feeling the difference between possible and probable, between conceivable and likely, letting statistics calm your fears, letting probability guide your choices. Let that thought calculate. Let it find its own odds. In the space between fear and frequency, where reason learns to breathe. You get the promotion, you worked hard, you deserved it, you earned it, your colleague gets promoted, politics, luck, connections, favoritism. This is attribution bias, the tendency to attribute your successes to internal factors, your failures to external ones, and the reverse for others. You win the game, skill, strategy, superior play, you lose the game. Bad luck, poor officiating, unfair conditions, others win. Luck, easy opponents, others lose. They choked. They're not good enough. They didn't try hard enough. This protects your ego, maintains your self-esteem, keeps you motivated, but it also distorts reality, prevents learning, creates blind spots. Maybe your success had some luck. Maybe your failure had some skill gaps. Maybe others' wins involved real talent. Maybe their losses involved bad circumstances. Maybe the truth is always mixed, always complex, always more nuanced than your first explanation. Maybe wisdom is holding attribution lightly, seeing the whole picture, giving others the same complexity you give yourself. Let that thought attribute. Let it find its own causes. In the space between explanation and excuse, where truth learns to be humble. Steve is quiet, detail-oriented, methodical, organized. Is he more likely a librarian or a farmer? Most people say librarian because Steve fits the stereotype, the mental image, the representative example, but there are far more farmers than librarians. So statistically, Steve is more likely to be a farmer. This is the representativeness heuristic, judging probability by similarity. How well something matches your mental prototype. Your brain has templates, typical examples, standard patterns. When you meet someone new, you compare them to these templates. When you see an event, you match it to familiar stories. But templates are incomplete. Stereotypes are misleading. Typical examples aren't always probable examples. The quiet person might be anything. The unusual event might have a common cause. The familiar pattern might be the wrong pattern. Maybe wisdom is thinking beyond stereotypes, looking past first impressions, considering base rates, probabilities, alternative explanations, remembering that people are complex, events are nuanced, reality rarely fits neat categories. Let that thought represent, let it find its own similarity in the space between typical and actual, where truth learns to surprise. The project is failing. You've invested months, thousands of dollars, countless hours, but you can't stop, you can't give up. You invest more, hope more, dig deeper, into the hole you're trying to escape. This is escalation of commitment, the tendency to increase investment in a losing proposition because of previously invested resources. The war is going badly, but we've lost so many soldiers. We can't let their sacrifice be meaningless, so we send more. The business is hemorrhaging money, but we've put in so much. We can't quit now, so we invest more. The relationship is toxic, but you've been together for years. You can't throw it all away, so you stay longer. Your brain hates waste. It wants past investments to mean something. It would rather compound a mistake than admit one. But sometimes, the best choice is to stop, to cut losses, to walk away, no matter how much you've already spent. Maybe courage is knowing when to quit, when to change course, when to admit that good money shouldn't follow bad. That time spent doesn't justify time wasted. Let that thought escalate. Let it find its own commitment. In the space between persistence and wisdom, where letting go learns to be brave. The house costs $300,000, expensive. Then you see one for $500,000. Suddenly, $300,000 feels reasonable, affordable, a bargain. This is the contrast effect, how context changes perception, how comparison alters value. The same temperature feels hot in winter, cold in summer. The same salary feels high after a low offer, low after a high expectation. The same person looks attractive next to someone plain, plain next to someone beautiful. Your brain doesn't measure absolute values. It measures relative ones, differences, contrasts, changes. This can be manipulated. Car dealers show the expensive model first, restaurants list the premium option at the top. Negotiators make extreme first offers, all to shift your reference point, your sense of normal, your perception of reasonable. Maybe wisdom is recognizing the frame, seeing the context, asking, Compared to what? According to whom? Based on which standard? Finding your own baseline, your own measure of value, independent of what came before. Let that thought contrast. Let it find its own comparison. In the space between relative and absolute, where value learns to stand alone. Full moon. Emergency room gets busy. There must be a connection. Rain on Monday, traffic gets worse. Obviously, related. Your horoscope says, be careful today. You trip on the sidewalk. Proof that astrology works. This is illusory correlation. Seeing relationships between unrelated events, finding patterns in random coincidences, creating explanations for meaningless connections. Your brain loves cause and effect. It wants order, logic, predictability. So it connects dots, even when the dots don't want to be connected. Two things happen around the same time. They must be related. You think about someone, they call you. Telepathy. You wear your lucky shirt. Your team wins. Magic. You eat at a new restaurant. You get sick. Never again. But correlation isn't causation. Coincidence isn't connection. Timing isn't relationship. Sometimes things just happen at the same time, in the same place, for no reason other than chance. Maybe wisdom is resisting the urge to connect everything, to explain everything, to find meaning in every coincidence. Sometimes randomness is just randomness, and that's okay. Let that thought correlate. Let it find its own connection in the space between pattern and chaos, where acceptance learns to let go. You spill coffee on your shirt. Everyone notices, everyone stares, everyone judges, or do they? You trip on the stairs. The whole room sees you stumble, sees you fall, sees you embarrass yourself, or do they? This is the spotlight effect, the tendency to overestimate how much attention others pay to your appearance and behavior. You feel like you're on stage, like every mistake is magnified, like every flaw is obvious, like every awkward moment is remembered forever. But the truth is, people are busy, distracted, focused on their own problems, their own mistakes, their own embarrassments. They notice you less than you think, remember you less than you fear, judge you less than you imagine. Most of the time, they're thinking about themselves, worried about their own spotlight, their own performance, their own audience. Maybe freedom begins with realizing you're not the center of everyone's attention. You're not the star of their show. You're just another person in a world full of people, all worried about their own spotlights, all feeling overexposed, all forgetting to notice each other. Let that thought dim. Let it find its own light in the space between attention and indifference, where freedom learns to be invisible. You learned to drive years ago. Now it's automatic, natural, easy. You can't remember what it felt like to not know how, to be confused by mirrors, overwhelmed by pedals, terrified of lanes. This is the curse of knowledge. Once you know something, you can't unknow it, can't remember the before, can't imagine the confusion. You try to teach someone, to explain, to help, but your explanations make no sense, too fast, too complex, too advanced. You skip steps that seem obvious, use words they don't understand, assume knowledge they don't have, because to you, it's simple, clear, natural, but to them, it's foreign, confusing, overwhelming. Teachers know this curse, experts feel it. Anyone who's mastered anything struggles with it. The more you know, the harder it becomes to remember not knowing, to see through beginners' eyes, to speak in beginners' words. Maybe wisdom is forgetting your knowledge, returning to wonder, remembering the first time you didn't understand, when everything was new, when simple things were miracles. Let that thought forget. Let it find its own beginning, in the space between knowing and learning, where teaching learns to remember. 3 movie tickets, small for $8, large for $10, medium for $9.50. Which do you choose? Most people pick the large, because compared to the medium, it's a bargain. But without the medium, you might have chosen the small. This is the decoy effect, when a third option changes your preference between the first two. The medium ticket isn't meant to be chosen. It's meant to make the large look good. Restaurants do this. 2 steaks, $30, $50, then they add a $45 steak. Suddenly, $50 feels reasonable. Politicians do this. Propose something extreme, then something moderate. The moderate option looks sensible. Even if, before the extreme, it would have seemed too much. Your brain thinks in comparisons, in contrasts, in relationships. It doesn't evaluate absolute value. It evaluates relative value. This can be exploited, manipulated, used against you, but it can also help you choose. If you understand the game, maybe wisdom is seeing the decoy, recognizing manipulation, asking, what would I choose if there were only 2 options? What am I really comparing? Let that thought choose. Let it find its own value. In the space between options and intentions, where choice learns to see clearly. You love pineapple on pizza. Obviously, most people do too. You hate horror movies. Clearly, most people agree. You vote for this candidate. Surely, most reasonable people feel the same. This is the false consensus effect, the tendency to overestimate how much others share your beliefs, preferences, and behaviors. Your world feels normal to you. Your choices seem obvious. Your opinions appear reasonable, so others must think the same, feel the same, choose the same, but they don't. Your normal is not their normal. Your obvious is not their obvious. Your reasonable is not their reasonable. This creates surprise, confusion, conflict. When others disagree, you wonder why. When they choose differently, you question their judgment. When they believe differently, you doubt their intelligence. But maybe they're not wrong. Maybe they're just different. Maybe their experience shaped different conclusions. Maybe their context created different values. Maybe wisdom is assuming difference, expecting disagreement, welcoming variety, remembering that your perspective is just one among many. Let that thought agree. Let it find its own consensus in the space between self and other, where understanding learns to expand. Someone believes vaccines cause autism. You show them evidence, studies, data, facts. They should change their mind, but they don't. Instead, their belief grows stronger, more certain, more entrenched. This is the backfire effect. When corrective information strengthens false beliefs instead of weakening them, your brain doesn't like being wrong. It doesn't want to change direction. It prefers consistency, certainty, stability. So when facts challenge beliefs, it fights back. It finds flaws in the evidence. It questions the source. It reinterprets the data. It does whatever it takes to preserve the original belief. Because changing beliefs feels like losing, like admitting error, like becoming someone different. And that's scary, uncomfortable, threatening. So the mind doubles down, digs deeper, builds higher walls. Maybe wisdom is approaching beliefs gently, with humility, with patience, not trying to demolish, but to plant seeds, to create doubt, not certainty, to ask questions, not give answers. Because changing minds is like growing gardens. It takes time, it takes care, it takes the right conditions. Let that thought backfire, let it find its own resistance, in the space between truth and comfort, where change learns to be welcome. You buy the red car, not the blue one. Immediately, you notice how great red looks, how practical it is, how smart your choice was. The blue car now seems less appealing, less practical, less wise. This is choice-supportive bias. After making a decision, you focus on the positive aspects of what you chose and the negative aspects of what you didn't. Your brain wants to feel good about your choices. It doesn't want regret, doubt, second-guessing. So it edits reality, highlights the good, minimizes the bad, creates a story where you chose perfectly. You picked the restaurant, the food is amazing, the service is great, the atmosphere is perfect. But if your friend had picked the same place, you might notice the slow service, the noisy crowd, the overpriced menu. Choice creates commitment. Commitment creates bias. Bias creates satisfaction. But it also creates blindness to real problems, to better options, to honest evaluation. Maybe wisdom is holding choices lightly, staying open to new information, admitting when you chose poorly, learning from mistakes rather than defending them. Let that choice settle. Let it find its own support in the space between decision and delusion, where honesty learns to choose. You're buying a phone, you research, compare, read reviews, watch videos, gather data, more and more and more, until you know everything about every model, every feature, every specification. But do you decide better, or do you just decide slower? This is information bias, the tendency to seek more information, even when it doesn't help, even when it hurts, even when you already know enough. More data feels more responsible, more thorough, more intelligent, but sometimes more data just creates confusion, paralysis, overwhelm. The extra information doesn't improve your decision. It just delays it, complicates it, clouds it. Your brain evolved to value information because information meant survival, knowing where the food was, where the dangers lurked. But modern life offers infinite information, and most of it is irrelevant, redundant, distracting. Maybe wisdom is knowing when you know enough, when more research won't help, when the decision is ready to be made, because perfect information doesn't exist, and perfect decisions don't require it. Let that information flow. Let it find its own sufficiency in the space between knowing and choosing, where action learns to begin. 2 investment options. Option A has a known return, 5% annually, guaranteed. Option B has an unknown return. Could be 3%, could be 15, probably somewhere in between. Which do you choose? Most people choose option A, the known quantity, the certain outcome, even when option B might be better. This is the ambiguity effect, the tendency to avoid uncertain options, even when uncertainty might work in your favor. Your brain prefers the devil it knows. To the angel, it doesn't. Known risks feel manageable, unknown risks feel terrifying. So you choose the familiar job over the startup opportunity, the safe investment over the promising venture, the predictable relationship over the exciting unknown. But life's best opportunities often come wrapped in uncertainty, in ambiguity, in mystery. The greatest rewards hide behind the unclear outcomes. Maybe courage is embracing ambiguity, dancing with uncertainty, choosing the path where you can't see the destination, because sometimes the unknown is better than the known. Let that ambiguity settle. Let it find its own clarity in the space between certain and possible, where adventure learns to begin. All roses are flowers. Some flowers fade quickly. Therefore, some roses fade quickly. The logic is sound. The conclusion follows. You accept it easily. But what if the conclusion contradicted something you believed? Would you still accept the logic? This is belief bias. When prior beliefs influence logical reasoning, when conclusions that match your views seem more logical than conclusions that challenge them. You evaluate arguments not just by their structure, but by their content, their implications, their comfort. If the reasoning leads somewhere you already agree with, it seems solid, convincing, obviously true. If it leads somewhere you disagree with, you find flaws, weaknesses, obvious problems. But logic doesn't care about your preferences. Truth doesn't bend to your comfort. Sound reasoning should lead to sound conclusions, regardless of whether you like them. Maybe wisdom is separating logic from loyalty, evaluation from emotion, reasoning from preference, following arguments wherever they lead. Even when they lead somewhere you'd rather not go. Let that belief bend. Let it find its own logic in the space between preference and proof, where truth learns to stand alone. The doctor recommends surgery. The expert suggests stocks. The professor explains history. The CEO predicts growth. You listen, you believe, you follow, without question, without doubt, without your own analysis. This is authority bias, the tendency to attribute greater accuracy to the opinion of an authority figure and be more influenced by that opinion. White coats command respect. Titles create trust. Positions produce persuasion. The person, with credentials, must know better, must be right, must be worth following. But authority doesn't guarantee accuracy. Expertise in one area doesn't transfer to another. Today's expert might be tomorrow's fool. History is full of authorities who were wrong, doctors who recommended harmful treatments, experts who predicted market crashes that never came, professors who taught theories later disproven. Maybe wisdom is respecting authority without surrendering your judgment, listening to experts while thinking for yourself, valuing credentials while questioning conclusions, because the person in charge might know more, but they might also be human, fallible, wrong. Let that authority speak. Let it find its own credibility. In the space between expertise and truth, where judgment learns to think. You wait in line for 3 hours for a restaurant. When you finally eat, the food tastes amazing, better than anywhere else, worth every minute. But is it really? Or does the wait make it taste better? This is effort justification, the tendency to value outcomes more highly when they required significant effort. The fraternity initiation was brutal, so membership feels precious. The mountain climb was exhausting, so the view seems magnificent. The degree took years, so it feels more valuable. Your brain hates wasted effort. It wants your struggles to mean something, so it inflates the value of hard-won prizes, makes difficult achievements seem more worthwhile than easy ones. But effort doesn't create value. Difficulty doesn't guarantee quality. Sometimes the best things come easily. Sometimes the hardest paths lead nowhere special. Sometimes struggling is just struggling, not noble, not meaningful, just inefficient. Maybe wisdom is valuing things for what they are, not for what they cost, seeking the easy path when it leads to the same place, because life is short, energy is limited, and suffering is optional. Let that effort rest. Let it find its own justification in the space between struggle and worth, where value learns to be honest. 10 compliments, 1 criticism. Which one do you remember? Which one keeps you awake? Which one echoes in your mind? The criticism, always the criticism. This is negativity bias, the tendency for negative events to have greater psychological impact than positive ones. Bad news feels more urgent, more important, more real than good news. Your brain evolved this way. Negative information meant danger, threat, something to avoid. So it paid attention. It remembered. It prioritized the bad over the good. 1 rotten apple spoils the bunch. 1 bad review outweighs 10 good ones. 1 harsh word cancels 1,000 kind ones. This keeps you safe, alert, prepared for problems. But it also steals joy, distorts perspective, makes life seem darker than it is. Maybe wisdom is actively seeking the positive, consciously counting the good, deliberately dwelling on what works, what helps, what heals. Because for every piece of bad news, there are dozens of good ones. You just have to choose to see them. Let that negativity balance. Let it find its own weight in the space between threat and gift, where gratitude learns to grow. A vacation, 2 weeks long, mostly wonderful, sunny days, great food, good company, but the flight home was delayed. 6 hours in a crowded airport. How do you remember the trip? Probably not well, because of those final hours. This is the peak end rule. We judge experiences largely based on how they felt at their peak and how they ended. The middle gets forgotten. The average gets ignored. Only the highest point and the final moment matter. A movie can be boring for 90 minutes, but if the ending is great, you leave satisfied. A relationship can be beautiful for years, but if it ends badly, that's what you remember. A career can be successful for decades, but if retirement is unpleasant, that colors everything. Your memory is not a recording, it's an editor. It highlights certain scenes, cuts out the mundane, creates a story where peaks and endings define the whole. Maybe wisdom is paying attention to endings, making them meaningful, beautiful, kind, because that's what you'll remember. That's what will remain. Let that peak settle. Let it find its own ending in the space between experience and memory where stories learn to last. The system is unfair, broken, rigged against ordinary people. You know this, you see it, you feel it. But somehow, you also defend it, make excuses, find reasons why it has to be this way. This is system justification, the tendency to defend and justify the status quo, even when it disadvantages you, even when it's clearly wrong, even when you're its victim. Your brain wants stability, predictability, order. It prefers a flawed system to no system, a bad structure to chaos, an unfair game to no game at all. So it finds ways to make sense of injustice, to rationalize inequality, to explain away suffering. The poor deserve it, the rich earned it. The system rewards merit, hard work, good choices, even when evidence suggests otherwise, even when your own experience contradicts it. Maybe wisdom is questioning the system, seeing its flaws, imagining alternatives, refusing to justify what can't be justified. Because systems are made by humans, and humans make mistakes, and mistakes can be corrected. Let that system justify. Let it find its own defense in the space between acceptance and change, where progress learns to begin. The sign says, do not touch, so you want to touch. The rule says, no parking, so you consider parking. The law says, no jaywalking, so you eye the street. This is reactance theory. When freedom feels threatened, you want it back. Even if you didn't want it before. Your brain values autonomy, choice, control. When someone tells you what to do, something rebels, resists, pushes back, even when the advice is good, even when the rule makes sense, even when compliance would help you. Teenagers know this feeling. Parents try to control them, so they assert independence, sometimes foolishly, sometimes dangerously, but always authentically. Adults feel it too. The boss micromanages, so you slow down. The government mandates something, so you question it. The expert insists you should, so you wonder why not. Maybe wisdom is recognizing reactance in yourself, in others, understanding that people need to feel free, to choose, to decide, even when their choice is wrong, because forced compliance breeds resentment, while chosen compliance breeds commitment. Let that reaction flow. Let it find its own freedom in the space between control and choice, where rebellion learns to think. She got cancer. She must have done something wrong, smoked, stressed, lived badly. He lost his job. He must have deserved it, slacked off, made enemies, failed somehow. They're poor. They must be lazy, unmotivated, making bad choices. This is the just world hypothesis, the belief that the world is fair, that people get what they deserve, that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. It's comforting, this belief. It makes the world feel predictable, controllable, safe. If you're good, nothing bad will happen. If something bad happens, it's because you weren't good enough. But the world isn't fair. Good people suffer randomly. Bad people prosper inexplicably. Terrible things happen to wonderful people for no reason, no justice, no cosmic balance, just chance, circumstance, the indifferent universe doing what it does. Maybe wisdom is accepting injustice without becoming unjust yourself, helping victims without blaming them, fighting unfairness without expecting perfect fairness, because the world doesn't owe you justice, but you can still choose to be just. Let that justice balance. Let it find its own world, in the space between fairness and reality, where compassion learns to act. You spend all weekend building furniture, following instructions, fighting with screws, cursing at diagrams. Finally, it's done, and it's beautiful, perfect, better than anything you could buy, even though it's crooked, wobbly, clearly inferior. This is the IKEA effect, the tendency to value things more highly when you've put effort into creating them. Your homemade cake tastes better than the bakeries. Your painted fence looks nicer than the professionals. Your assembled bookshelf seems sturdier than the store-bought one. Labor creates love, effort breeds attachment. The sweat becomes part of the value, part of the meaning, part of the story. This isn't entirely wrong. There is something special about making, creating, building with your hands. It connects you to the object, to the process, to yourself. But it also blinds you to flaws, to alternatives, to the possibility that someone else might do it better. Maybe wisdom is appreciating your creations while staying honest about their quality, loving the process more than the product. Because the real value isn't in what you made, it's in who you became by making it. Let that effect build. Let it find its own assembly in the space between making and having, where creation learns to matter. If only you had more money, then you'd be happy. If only you lived somewhere warmer, then life would be perfect. If only you found love, then everything would make sense. This is the focusing illusion. When thinking about any factor that affects well-being, you tend to overestimate its importance because you're focusing on it. It fills your attention, dominates your thoughts. Seems like the most important thing, the only thing that matters. But happiness isn't simple, isn't singular. It comes from many sources, many factors, many small things that add up. Money helps, but only to a point. Climate matters, but you adapt quickly. Love is wonderful, but it's not everything. The thing you think will change your life probably won't. Not as much as you imagine. Not for as long as you hope. Because humans are adaptable, resilient, complex. We adjust to new circumstances, find new problems, discover new needs. Maybe wisdom is seeing the whole picture, all the factors, all the sources of satisfaction, not putting all your hope in one place, one person, one change, because happiness is a recipe, not an ingredient. Let that focus broaden. Let it find its own illusion in the space between attention and reality, where perspective learns to expand. $20 in your wallet, one $20 bill or $21 bills. Which feels like more money? Which are you less likely to spend, the 20, the large bill, even though they're worth exactly the same? This is the denomination effect. Large denominations feel more valuable than equivalent amounts in smaller bills. Breaking 100 feels significant, like you're spending real money. Breaking a 5 feels trivial, like pocket change. So you're more careful with large bills, more thoughtful, more reluctant to spend them, even when the purchase is identical. Credit cards eliminate this effect. Digital payments make all money feel abstract, small, painless, so you spend more, think less, feel less connected to the cost. Maybe this is why your grandparents paid cash, counted carefully, felt the weight of each transaction, because physical money has presence, has substance, has psychological weight. Maybe wisdom is making money feel real again, feeling the cost, weighing the value, pausing before you pay. Because when money feels like money, you spend it more wisely. Let that denomination count. Let it find its own value in the space between form and worth, where spending learns to think. Two statements, both about the same topic. One is written clearly, simple words, short sentences, easy to follow. The other uses complex language, long paragraphs, difficult to parse. Which one do you believe? Probably the first, the simple one, even if the complex one has better evidence. This is cognitive ease. Information that's easy to process feels more true, more credible, more trustworthy than information that requires effort. Your brain likes shortcuts. It wants to understand quickly, without strain, without struggle. So it trusts what comes easily, suspects what comes hard. Clear fonts feel more honest than blurry ones. Familiar words seem more accurate than technical terms. Simple explanations appear more valid than complex ones. But truth isn't always simple, isn't always easy to grasp. Sometimes the real answer is complicated, nuanced, difficult to explain in simple terms. Maybe wisdom is distrusting easy answers, questioning simple solutions, being suspicious of anything that seems too clear, too obvious, too easy to understand. Because reality is complex, and complexity deserves your effort. Let that ease flow. Let it find its own difficulty in the space between simple and true, where understanding learns to work.